Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Happy New Year. I hope you had a good festive period, regardless of how you choose to spend it. Because it's the start of January, it's time for me to take a look back not only at December's reading, but also at my reading for 2023 as a whole. So last year I did a full stats wrap up looking at various different aspects of my reading because I put a poll out and the response was something like 75% said yes, we'd like to see that. I'm not going to do it quite the same this year, so what we've got today is my regular December wrap up. I'll have a look at the usual monthly and year to date, which will be end of year in this case, stats for the reading, and then I'll go into the books that I read or DNF'd as the case may be in December. And then after that I'm just going to take a bit of an abbreviated look at some of the stats that I personally track for my reading. So as usual there'll be timestamps down below, so if you're not interested in the stats at the start and the end of the video, you can skip to just the book talk, which is going to be in the middle of this one. So December was a bit maybe stop and start for me, but that's probably not a surprise because there's quite a lot going on in December. For me personally, I also had the advent of winter, which was a lot of work. I was spending quite a bit of time basically every day just making sure that everything was set for that, responding to queries on the Kickstarter, making sure, especially at the start of the month, that everyone could access their daily stories. So yeah, that took out a lot of my time and I really wasn't doing much reading. And I thought I was going to end up with literally just 2 books read for the month. I did get some additional reading time that I wasn't expecting at the end of the month, so I did manage to get a good bit of audiobook listening in during those last few days of the month, and that led me to a total of 3 finished books plus 1 novella. I also had 2 DNFs for December as well. So those books that I finished gave me a total page count for the month of 2,183. So the total for 2023 was 35,612. The average page count that I read, because one of them was a bit of a chonker, for December was 684 pages, taking me to 524 as my average page count for all of the books, minus novellas, that I read in 2023. The average rating for the books that I finished in December was 4.13, giving me a total end of year average rating of 4.08. For the series then, the end of year figures gave me 18 series that I started and decided I was going to continue with, 9 series that I finished in total over the course of a year, 10 that I decided not to continue with, so I read the first book but decided that I didn't want to read the second one, 21 series that I'm up to date with, so I've read all of the books that have been published so far but the series isn't yet finished, and then the total ongoing series then that I've got was sitting at 36. And then as usual, the last stat is my days since last 5-star read, which at the time of filming is now sitting at 11 days. So as usual for the books, I'll start off with the DNFs. The first of those, one of my first reads of the month, I think I started this back at the end of November actually, was Renia by Carl Forshaw. This one came highly recommended to me. I liked the idea of it, it sounded pretty good. But when I was reading it, it just didn't quite work out for me. There were 2 kind of dual story, or not dual storylines, but there were 2 storylines at different timelines. So the title character Renia is I think something like early 20s in the main portion of the book, but then there are some flashback type chapters as well where she's 6 or 7 maybe, I'm not sure if the age is actually specified, but we've got an older and a younger kind of portion of her life, kind of present day and early days, and to be honest, neither of them was really working for me. I didn't really find that they were moving forward enough in a way that interested me and kept me wanting to turn the page. So it was a bit disappointing in that sense. There were a few aspects of the world that I didn't quite understand, but I didn't finish the book, so obviously I don't know how much of that would have been explained and how much of it is just kind of building throughout the course of the book. So it's not unusual to have those kind of feelings for a book before you finished it basically, so that's not a problem for me. I ended up putting this one down at 25% because, as I say, it just wasn't gripping me and it was taking me quite a long time to read it. My friend Esme has read this one, really liked it, and we were discussing it a couple of times. I think at about 13% she said the way I was feeling about the book at the time, the things that I'm not enjoying about it, they're probably not really going to change. My enjoyment of it as a whole is probably not going to be changed based on her knowledge of the book as a whole. And I gave it a little bit more than that. I pretty much doubled the page count that I was on at that point in time. And at the point that I gave up at 25%, that was definitely the case. It wasn't improving for me, so I decided to give this one a skip. And then the second DNF that I had later on in the month was The Worthy by Anna K. Moss. This one I gave up to 20%, I think it was just under 100 pages that I read. There was, again, a couple of different storylines in this one. You've got a brother and a sister as not alternating chapters. We spend more time with the brother, but we do go to a different part of the world and we see the sister as well. They are prince and princess, and there's kind of a succession battle to see who is going to be the new monarch when their father dies. You've got some people who are trying to fight for the sister, basically, or at least against the brother. It's kind of a best of two evils is the way they're looking at it, because they don't really want either of them, to be honest. But this one I just thought was kind of a little bit chaotic. It was jumping back, well, it wasn't really jumping back and forward. It was more than it was kind of jumping to conclusions, I guess, in a sense. The characters were deciding what to do and just going for it, and there was no thought process given, there was no reasoning whatsoever. It just seemed that it was all a little bit chaotic in the decision making process. There was one point I was actually reading, although I've got the physical edition, I was reading it on my Kindle, and there was one point where they were in a place and something happened, and then the next chapter they were somewhere else and they were going off and stealing an item, and then the next chapter they were back in the original place talking about going off to steal this item, which was really weird. And it turned out, checking it in this edition here, the chapters were actually out of order in the Kindle edition, and that was kind of the last straw for me in a sense, because when I was originally reading it and we skipped ahead, unknowingly I skipped a chapter essentially because that's how they were laid out in the Kindle. I didn't think twice about it. I wasn't surprised. It just felt natural from what I'd read so far in the story. And I think if you can skip a chapter accidentally and think that it just fits in with what you've read, even though you've missed what literally happened between, I don't think that's a good thing. So I decided to give this one up because it wasn't gripping me, it wasn't holding my attention, and as I say, it was just a little bit chaotic, so I decided to put this one down. So then we go into the books that I did finish, and I've got an audiobook first of all. This is The Legend of Tell Book 1 by J.D.L. Roselle. This one was a king's bargain. I read this one because I enjoyed J.D.L. Roselle's story in the advent of winter, and he recommended this series as a good place to start off if I wanted to read more of his writing, which I did. This one I quite enjoyed. There were quite a few kind of older, almost classic fantasy, I guess, tropes in there. You had various creatures that you'd be very much at home with if you've grown up reading fantasy from the 80s and the 90s and so forth. And I really liked that because, I mean, that's who I am. I'm definitely at home with that. The writing was really good. I quite liked the characters. It's nice kind of seeing someone who's at the, not necessarily at the end of his, if you want to call it a career, but someone who has a legend that he's kind of moved on from, basically, and he's in disguise, he's changed his name. People who know him don't associate him with this legend because that's by design. He's kind of living out the rest of his life in peace, so to speak. But then he gets pulled back into it, and you've got another character who's with him who he's going through this learning process, finding out that he is actually this legendary character from his past, basically. And I quite like that element, and I like the kind of going back and meeting all of these people, and then you've got this outsider who's kind of incredulous. All of these people I've heard stories about, and you've actually lived them, and now I'm meeting them. And I think it worked really well. It was a really nice story. I liked the elements of it, the way they integrated kind of building a new legend essentially, and I think that's going to serve me really well in the series when I do continue with it. This one I gave 4 stars to because it was a really solid read, a really good opening book in a series, and yeah, it's one that I'm really looking forward to continuing. Then I read Those Who Resist by N.C. Scrimger. This is book 3, the final book in the Waystations trilogy. I listened to the first 2 books on audio. I was doing a buddy read with my book bestie Nina, and we didn't realise it when we actually planned this one in, but book 3 doesn't yet have an audio book to accompany it. So I was a little bit, I guess, dubious. I wasn't sure how it was going to work, going from audio and really enjoying them to then reading them and not having the voices in my head and things like that. But it worked out absolutely fine. It was maybe a bit of a slower read because of the way I do audio against physical reads, but that wasn't a problem. I really enjoyed this one. Book 2 had a really intense ending. It was really high octane, and that kind of was the theme throughout the entirety of Those Who Resist. It just started off pretty quickly, right from, maybe not right from the first page, maybe like a chapter or so in, and it pretty much went straight through to the end. In between, there were odd little chapters here and there where you had a bit of a breather. The characters had kind of a bit of downtime, essentially. So you had a lot of intensity, a lot of real fast, intense action throughout most of the book, and then just interspersed in between these chapters, you had that chance to let the pulse slow down a little bit and to gather your breath and prepare for the next kind of upsurge in the action, basically. I really like the way that worked. I like a nice fast-paced book with a lot of action in it, and that's exactly what I got here. But you do need those slower periods as well to create a bit of a balance with the pacing, and I thought it worked really, really well here. It was a really good story. I loved the characters. I loved the sacrifices that you had when things go wrong, and overall I thought it was just a really great ending to what has been a really great series for me. I gave this one 5 stars as my final 5-star read of 2023. So then I had my big chonker that I read in December, and this one was, I've got them in the 2 volumes, by Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson, book 3 of the Stormlight Archive. So this one, I've got the graphic audio books for these, and I really had a great time reading book 2, Words of Radiance, this way. For this one, I was really struggling for a period. It was a proper kind of book of 2 halves for me, I suppose. Around I think it was leading up to the 50% mark, I was talking to a couple of friends in Discord and discussing my thoughts on it and saying that I really wasn't having a good time with it. We started to move across to get a few POV chapters from characters who had been kind of side characters, basically, and I just really wasn't interested in them. I didn't care for those characters, so those chapters were really boring for me, essentially. And there were various chapters all in a row that were like this, and even the ones with some of our main characters, I was starting to fall out of love with them, isn't the right term, but I wasn't really enjoying them, basically. I had characters like Dalinar, who I quite liked in book 2. I just didn't like him in here. There was something about him, and there were a lot of kind of flashback chapters with him which I really didn't enjoy, and maybe that's what it was, but he just came across as really kind of petulant to me, and I didn't like his character in here, basically. I got to the point where at about 50% I was genuinely considering DNF'ing it because I just wasn't enjoying it that much, but then shortly after that it did turn around, and I was laughing with my friend Arlena because there's a bit that happens just after the 50% mark, maybe a little bit further on than that, but a lot of people, she was saying, feel it's really boring and they don't like it. I was absolutely fine with it. That kind of just before that and then that section, without spoilers, it's vague, I know, but those sections kind of turned this book around for me because I started really enjoying it again. The good bits in here, some of them are very, very good. So where there were a few bits that were boring, they were actually overturned by those good bits for me, and I ended up, I hesitate to say I really enjoyed it because of those boring bits that literally I felt like DNFing the book over. But I did have a good experience overall because the ending of it, the final, I don't know, 10-15%, I'm not sure, over this 12-ish 100-page book were really, really good for me, really good intensity. I really enjoyed them, and the graphic audio definitely helped with that as well, I would say. But I gave this one 4 stars, and I did say when I kind of announced that in my Discord, that we've got a channel for rating the books that you've read, I said it was kind of the most begrudging 4-star that I've ever given a book, because it is barely worth it for me. I think it was probably, if I gave smaller fractions, it would maybe be more along the lines of a 3.75. It was more than a 3.5-star read, but yeah, it was 4 stars for me, but literally just by the skin of its teeth. Some of the elements in here were definitely 5-star though, so at least that's good. And now I can move on to the next book and see what I think of that one. And then, because I had a little bit of time at the end of the month, I didn't want to start on my January reads too early, bearing in mind that 2 of the books here, Oathbringer and The Worthy, I've already said in my January TBR that I'm carrying them over to January. Finished them both, or finished one, DNF'd one, so that's kind of gone out the window, and it was out of date before I'd even actually published the video. But I didn't want to start my January reads in December for no real reason, but I did decide to pick up a novella to just get one more book for the turn of the year, and because it was one that I've been looking forward to. So I read Ruins of Smoke, which is a prequel novella to The Smokesmiths by Joelle F. Silver. And this one was one that in a sense was quite disappointing to me. It's I've had a couple of these now, and I've decided that I really dislike where you have a prequel novella, so it introduces events, or it's what happened before the events in book 1, but you pretty much need to read book 1 before the prequel novella to get an idea of what's going on in here. We started off, if you've read the novella The Fall by Ryan Carhill, it's very similar to this book in certain aspects, only in the structure. The storyline is, you know, it's not similar really, but you do have a big battle, and it's chaos absolutely everywhere. You're thrown right into the middle of it. Literally, you start off here in the deep end, but then actually you realise there's no shallow end to go to anyway. But we start off in here with the big battle. There are 8 chapters, 2 chapters each for 4 different characters. One essentially bad and 3 good characters. So in that sense, it's a very similar structure to The Fall. And I thought in here we had 8 really high intensity, pretty good chapters that were really showing me a lot of things about this world, a lot of powers, a lot of what will become the history, essentially. And I thought it was a really good ending to a book. The problem I had here was I didn't have the book that led up to it, that gave all of the build-up, the introduction of the characters, the world, what these powers are. I just had to, because I've not read book 1 in the series that follows this one chronologically, I just had no idea what was going on and what all of these things were and what the people could do. So I was quite conflicted in that sense, because I literally, as I say, I was thrown in the deep end. I didn't find a shallow end. I got out to the end of this book still, in many senses, not really knowing what was happening. But at the same time, it was quite good. It was quite enjoyable. So yeah, a little bit conflicted. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars because of that. I do feel, especially after speaking to a couple of people who've read both, I do feel that you probably get a lot more out of this one if you read Seeds of War before you get to Ruins of Smoke. So those were my books for December, rounding out the year for me. Let me know in the comments down below what your books for December were. Which ones did you really enjoy? Were there any that you didn't enjoy so much? I will, before I close out this video, as I said, I will go through some of the stats that I track for my reading, or that I have tracked for my reading in 2023. So with those 4 titles in the end that I did manage to finish in December, I ended up with 70 books in total. 67 of those were actual full novels, and only 3 of them were novellas. So I think I read 9 novellas last year, so a bit of a cut down there for no reason other than those are just the books that I decided to pick up. The ratings that I gave, I have a full breakdown on my tracking spreadsheet. I had 9 3-star ratings. That was the lowest rating that I gave. I don't rate books that I DNF, so essentially anything that I'm feeling is going to be below a 3 will probably get DNF'd, although that's not a rule I have. It's just just the way it works. But 9 at 3 stars, which is 13% of the books that I read. 3.5 stars, I had 11, which is 16%. 4 stars was the highest individual category for me, which is really good. I had 20 that I rated at 4 star, which is 29% of the books that I read. 4.5 stars was 11, so that's again 16%. And then 5-star reads, I had 14 over the course of the year, which is, I think, pretty good to average more than one a month. That's 20% of the books that I read in 2023. For the split between fantasy and sci-fi, this one was quite interesting for me, but I suppose not really surprising. I had 54 fantasy and 16 sci-fi books for the year, so that's 77.14% of the reading that I had was fantasy. Now, in the previous 2 years where I've been tracking using the same spreadsheet, 2021 was 87.8% fantasy and 2022 was 88.46% fantasy. So I've kind of doubled pretty much the percentage of the sci-fi reads that I had in 2023 over the previous 2 years. A large portion of that is because I was doing some sci-fi buddy reads with Nina. So we read The Expanse and we read the Way Stations trilogy. And for the books that I read, that was 8 of The Expanse. 11 if you then add on the Way Stations, and I read 16 in total. So that's a large portion of that is from those buddy reads. We're going to continue that in 2024 as well. The page count split for fantasy and sci-fi is almost exactly the same if you look at the percentages. I had 27,529 of my pages were for fantasy, 8,083 for sci-fi, so that's 77.3% of the pages that I actually read were for fantasy. That's not including the pages I read before DNF'ing books, so this is only from books that I've actually completed. As far as the averages go, fantasy, the average page count was 530, sci-fi was 505, so year to date or for 2023 in total it was 524, so that makes sense if more of the reading was fantasy. And the average rating, very close, almost identical between the two. So the average rating for the year was 4.08, for fantasy it was 4.07, and for sci-fi it was 4.09, so just a fraction either side of them. For my DNFs, I had a total of 14 this year. I DNF those books with a total of 1,561 pages read, which gives me 111 pages on average before I DNF'd a book. The average percentage read for that is 23%, so I think that's pretty good, and I'm definitely happy with that because it shows that I'm giving a book its opportunity to turn things around. Basically, I'm not DNFing really early in a book. I'm giving it a fair shot before I decide to put it down. The most read of the books that I DNF'd was 178 pages, which was 21% of the book. That was for Night Angel Nemesis by Brent Weeks, which is 848 pages, I think it was, something like that. And yeah, just obviously I DNF'd it, so it wasn't working for me. In terms of the percentages, 35% is the highest I got through a book. That was about 150 pages before putting it down, and that was Soul by Jackie Davis and Katie Grierson. For the smallest, the lowest in both of those metrics was actually the same book. This was The Crew by Sadir S. Samir. I put that one down at 13%, which was about 50 pages through. Purely for that one, there was a lot of humour in it, and it really wasn't working for me. So that's the sort of thing that really isn't going to turn around if I continue reading for a bit more. In terms of ARCs then, so advanced review copies, these are primarily books that I've requested, whether it's from the author or from NetGalley. So these ones should be books that I'm really interested in, as opposed to books that authors have offered to me. So they've sought me out rather than I've sought them out. So I had 14 ARCs in 2023, a total of 7,755 of my finished book pages, if you like, were from advanced review copies. So that's an average of 553 pages per ARC. The average rating that I gave those was 4.39. So as with last year, this is a pretty high average, showing that I know what my tastes are like. I know what I like as a general rule. And if I go out and seek a book and request a review copy of it, chances are I'm going to enjoy it. That doesn't always work, however, and indeed it can't, because you don't know for sure what a book's going to be like until you've read it. And actually, of the 14 books that I DNF'd this year, 5 of those, including Night Angel Nemesis for example, were arcs that I'd requested. So it does kind of work both ways. They're not guaranteed to be books that I like, and I will DNF an arc if I'm not enjoying it. I still review it. I put up the same as with any DNF that I have. I put up the reasons the book didn't work for me, reasons that it did work for me as well. So people might read my review and see something that I've picked out in there, whether I liked or didn't like, that they like, and they can go and read it and see for themselves. So there we go. Anyway, that's my December and that's my 2023 wrapped up. I do have a couple of videos in the pipeline where I further look back at 2023, looking at my reading goals, looking at a couple of the other aspects. My top 10 favourite books of the year is going to be the next video that I publish on the channel, for instance. So plenty more to come, but thank you for spending your time with me today. I hope you enjoyed this run through as my final wrap up of the year. I'll hopefully see you in the next video soon. Until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.